Everyone, good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you to Kingston Writers Fest. My name is Ara Macaulay. I'm the artistic director of the festival, and I'm pleased to present AdVerse Indigenous-Settler Relations. Before we begin the event, I'd like to acknowledge that the land on which the festival customarily takes place and where I am today is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. We gratefully acknowledge these Indigenous nations for their ongoing guardianship of this land. We agree to peaceably share in responsibility for the stewardship of this land, its waters, and all of its biodiversity. All those who come to live and work here are responsible for honoring these relationships in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. I'd like to thank the Canada Council, Canadian Heritage, Ontario Arts Council, and the City of Kingston and Kingston Arts Council for their ongoing support of the festival. We're grateful to those organizations and individuals who support the festival year-round. This event is an hour long and includes a question and answer period. So please feel free to type your questions into the Q&A box at any point during the event for us to answer. And you'll find that at the bottom of your Zoom screen. As a thank you for your continuing support of Kingston Writers Fest and for joining us for the virtual edition of the festival, we will randomly select a pre-registered participant of this event following our Q&A to receive a copy of Garry's book. We will be doing a book giveaway for each onstage event through the festival, so we encourage you to register and join us. Now I'm delighted to introduce this event's author, Garry Thomas Morse. Garry is a two-time nominee for the Governor General's Award for his poetry collections Discovery Passage and Prairie Harbor, and a two-time nominee for the Relit Award for his speculative fiction novels Minor Episodes / Major Ruckus and Rogue Cell / Carbon Harbor. His most recent titles are the short story collection Yams Do Not Exist and the poetry collection Scofflaw. Garry has served as the 2018 Jack McClellan Writer-in-Residence at the University of Toronto and as the 2019 Carol Shields Writer-in-Residence at the University in Winnipeg. Please welcome Garry Thomas Morse.
Hi, Kingston and everyone online. So I'll be talking a little bit about Scofflaw quickly. This is, this book is, I'll start with a short preamble, is that I'm from a West Coast Indigenous group called the Kwakwakwa, which is, or my mother is, and I grew up in Vancouver. So I've spent about 7 years living on the Canadian prairie. So I went to Saskatchewan and then to Manitoba, where I've been the longest. And so it's kind of was a culture shock for me in total, like from what I was used to, and whether it's among a collective, I think of both you call settlers or Indigenous peoples, because I'm sort of an outsider. And so I wanted to kind of channel that into a work. And it's kind of an outside, this character called Scofflaw is, Scofflaw is a term that came from Prohibition, which is where people who were flouting, they're drinking during the Prohibition or scofflaws. And it became a term that's for people just flouting the law generally, and like kind of draconian laws. And so I'm thinking of a character, Scofflaw, who's kind of a little outside of politics. And so anyway, keeping that in mind, the first poem, it came from an incident where there's this guy on the street, and he was bragging about his pesticides he had and how he'd killed all these dandelions, which are I've become very interested in butterflies. So that's the other thing I should mention since moving to Manitoba, because there's so many different species of butterflies. And he was bragging, yeah, I killed these dandelions, and blah, blah, blah. And so this inspired the first poem here. Name your poison. We had heard it all before, but sit down with a facial tissue or two. Bound to be pseudo-tragic, this primitive diatribe felt for stress and strain in every section. No way to cram our specialized surists into carved niche or crude aftermath of historical hiccups. Speaking of which, the new pesticides are too pricey this summer. What kind of town where them some bitches can drink in public from a dandelion? The other afternoon, plain as a nose on a face, that tawny-edged skipper clung to a purple shoot like nobody's business. We tell our amigo, quit trying to make vetch happen. Won't sleep a wink till that disturbed area is history. Tear up by the roots anything that stirs, bathe in blue light, bask in scenes of a greenish square, prepare the spare tabula rasa, clean enough to eat off of. What time the show begin? Acquainted at best with that teller of tall tales, we sink a few in endangered joints with bedroom views in the works, can still hear the weaker thans from the back room, can still hear ourselves not think. Maybe tear down those idle stretches of repurposed blotouts, name a progress. Game to try our hand at commodities like organic affect and free-range amnesia. Strum. Listen before you can say ululation. He's on you, plying his trade something terrible. Quick hands brown from the sun or circumstance of a difficult birth. Don't ask. Calls himself Scofflaw with a voice that cracks into that insectile rasp through rushes you hear through centuries of sheer innovation. After the first mow, see sweet clover fly up about his bare feet. Stands to reason there's a picture window alongside Jean Brébeuf where Scofflaw steps into the frame. Black swallowtails flit by. Early one morning, he shows us a long row of chrysalises, each from a silken hook suspending disbelief. Each shell's the same shade as the substrate, or so he says. Keep them peepers peeled for translucence, a hint of wet wings before eclosion. Whatever. Exterminate the brutes, or at least that wretched European skipper, a colonial threat to our trade in Timothy seed, feed of champions, prize getters, outside long shots. Meanwhile, our neighbor humble brags about the best poison for the dandelion menace. We expect it might come to blows, but Scofflaw's eyes brim over. In his worldview, grasshoppers are kosher, easily gulled, delicious between marked up, unleavened, what have you. Not to mention the way Athenian women wore fake cicadas to show they had sprung from the soil, rocks and trees, flaunting the virtue of being autochthones. Well, that shuts us the fuck up. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next one's called No Brainer, and it's there's a little thing in here about kind of about the land, because this idea of possessing the land and having the land for generations. So again, this is something that Scofflaw does not have at all. And there's a little thing about Beethoven in here too. No brainer. We've been round these parts for as long as anybody can remember. The land was grandparented down, and before then our seed blew about like fluff off a female poplar. Pussy, willow, sniffed Scofflaw, a first world problem for certain. He's got none too high an opinion of our whole freaking deal. Nothing's to be made out of turf that won't till. Digression becomes him, even that quip about Beethoven, answering the landowner under his name, signing brain holder, or Scofflaw's contrary claim, preoccupation with the savage mind subject to geographical amstray. By now we know climate change, not that climate changes us, affects our neuroplasticity. In other words, brains us something wicked. Scofflaw might as well be hectoring in the attic, talking Empedocles, or teasing us with echoes of aeolic murmurations for all his efforts to impress upon us furtive rearrangements of the furniture in his headspace, carried by charges of imminent storm or masses of warm air that imbue our slightest mishaps with emotional intensity. Negative ions, not negative capability, to sew up his syllogism or what have you. See among the tortoiseshells sipping willow the nightmare of any copy editor worth her salt, a stray comma on the wrong side of the tracks. Scofflaw says that some of those glitter-winged critters puddle in clusters to build up salt for sperm, i.e. a male monarch has no body politic when he's fixin' to duplicate bearing north in 3 generations. Before latex, there was Asclepius, cribbed for our pleasure, milkweed, the food they follow, the stuff they need to toxify themselves. Migration's hardly our priority, given the tug of umbilicals, our kids clambering out of caked earth with a sense of dominion over all winged things, fancy toast down their fronts. Quit lollygagging, Scofflaw. You'll put the little ones off their feed. What about the stone that clove to let out the northern lights? That hunk of labradorite spruces up your desk with primal imminence. Think of a stone hammer passed from hand to hand, then try not to. What in the trade we call a no-brainer. Copy that? So I do have a hunk of labradorite, but it's under a bunch of stuff, so I won't be able to show it to you. The next one's called Extinct Pennies, and there was another incident that happened in Winnipeg, where I am, where this guy came up and asked me and a friend about whether there's a area that's clear, like one of these disturbed areas I like, and because it's clear and green and the wind blows through in a nice way, and so it was probably where there was a railroad there that they stopped or took out. They took out the rails, and so it's kind of been preserved, like as a narrow space. And so this guy came up and asked if it was an Indian graveyard, and so I kind of, that inspired this poem. Extinct Pennies. You can't teach an old dog not to toss out recycling, knotted in plastic, nor a bear not to exfoliate with a hella big rock, nor the likes of us, the way a little bit of schnitka can up the ante. Our recidivist chum clears throat, kicks lectern aside, rails against corn-fed media for calling prairie grasses uncultivated farmland. Listen, in that string quartet, the sense of dread strikes us as cringy. Our sweetheart deal to extradite dissident organs via whims of the free market, 20 shades of totalitarianism, another agitado, life hack cracking up over relentless metronome. So goes the polystylism of the self. Pardoner's tale, another stir-fried apology presaging the moment about to seize the nation by its short-term memory. Whoa, the auto-acknowledgement dictates a moment of prayer for the pipeline extension that funded this mundane dog and pony, maybe a slow clap for cleanup crew taxed into making this finger food spread reality, not merely theory. Scofflaw shears grass ceiling, ignites some sage to bless the territory for saying no, but meaning yes. By no means the first to drink the Fool-Aid for only pennies a glass. Before his vitals are auctioned off, he could tutor a wax moth caterpillar to snack back on plastic or an intestinal nematode to eat up crude spillage, shinny up the traumatic bottleneck, swilling illustrateds from the 70s rebellion, shooting past looting natives depicted as lounging beneath tri-colored sun umbrellas. Even the tentative footbridge of e-reconciliation is built upon the bones of crushed workers buried in the comments. Weird how a synthetic thread and 10 million environmental T's will end the planet. In summary, sorry, not sorry for what was said during the public apology. Anything with more meat than a soundbite would soundly slap him out of this hysterical fiction with It'll No More showing record numbers, storming the one-track train of thought from sea to sea. They're doing Ubu this year, sampling ube to cool off, sweet tuber treats, according to our town crier, plagued by flies for his kinship with nature, for his station in the new world. In the scheme of things, we never knew no man to have such a non-smell. Dogs would stop to lick the fur along the backs of his legs. Shame we ever pegged him as a projection of our schismaticism, our stigmatism. No longer able to hear that trill in posthumous nocturne over the crunch of remains giving us grief. On the usual hike home, a tourist stops us to ask if the swath of green is an Indian graveyard, meaning to leave it intact like that. Scofflaw bears crowded teeth and spits, reckons it has endured a railroad. I'm gonna go forward to one called Smudge. This was inspired by something Warren Carey, the author, was talking about. Smart guy. He was talking about when they built the Human Rights Museum in Winnipeg. They found there were these native burial remains underneath, and so that seemed for me, I know there's a lot of talk about remains right now in Canada, but this is a very much this weird political juxtaposition of these high, lofty political, I'll call it ideology versus the reality, which is the disrespect and the problematizing the situation. Next to the museum, there's a statue of Gandhi outside that's always kind of in the snow. And sometimes people cover him up with things because he's cold, maybe. So I'm going to read this one called Smudge. Somewhere in this brain, not my department, that sudden surge of dopamine makes a dope out of you and me amid Beaux-Arts limestone, moving through Union Station, laughing at fossils, suffering that odd affliction, aka happiness, fingering trigger to glutamate backlash, itchy to break from collective descantus, cry the shock of wet socks and field of staticky feedback. Imagine a commodity fetish wrapped in a bay blanket coat. Why mind falters when aiming to outdraw these elemental conditions. Why mouth redresses proud tradition of striped bikini upon ethically sourced coyote fur scatter rug. Reversible for any spillage or historically mess for descendants to tidy up. Scatological catfish tossed back into the Seine. Our small tributary, our voyageur solitaire, forever othered among sleepwalkers for whom Nutty Club man cares. The more Costco China imports shunt into territory looking inward to Lake Fish Farm dream, petting sturgeon with lapels shaken in rage. You knew the bones were there when you built the museum. With Verismo pantomime scratched into repo land, queries with decorum whether the edifice is haunted by brute injustice or artifacts of our existence, haunted by that friendly penetration of sky. Our apologetic holidays, our eidetic self wraps self-same self in eider down and glosses indigenous loss, smudged right out of Heideggery Dasein. Scofflaw surfaces at the ethno-history due, with tobacco in his pouch, female sage in his hair with that erratic quality unique to stolen pictures. The bilingual deus ex machina preps us for spiral ascent, before we plunge through atrocity exhibit, find ourselves out in the cold again. Snow falling on shoulders of a charitably scarfed Gandhi, his sculpted state of appall, unless that is a sub-zero shrug, celebrated for perpetuity. I hope a few listeners get what the shrug is about. There was a long form of this book, my original manuscript. And anyway, this is a long story about the two different forms of this book. But at some point I was cutting out, I had a lot about butterflies because I like them. So it became a point where I was cutting out a lot of that material. So I wanted to put some of it back in. So this is this idea of this section where there's almost like this T.S. Eliot type little wasteland of stuff. So it's called Hate Waste. And yeah, so I'll read that. And it ends with something that's on a handbill. So I'm reading like a handbill that's referred to for addressing scofflaws to come and gather together. Hate waste. A spot of housekeeping as to what's to go out. Here we'd like to recognize the extent of this imaginary territory. Recognize this specious species of cryptolect in this degradable ragbag. Commas with scorched camouflage, tattered tortoiseshells named after the pattern on the back of an endangered turtle. Pictures not of our kissers, chrysalises blown after eclosion, escapees flown into aspen cavities. Here we'd like to recognize what the Navajo say about the black swallowtail watching over the spirit. Recognize that retract or redact is the interrogative. Back away slowly. First thought, best thought. Even this font is ontological varmint, roughly the pigment of Nabokov's know-how about blues he had never seen take flight. Shred, do not shed one tear over prickly rebuffs in a breast pocket with all the charm of a war-torn communique. Here we'd like to recognize the young and one another's dysphoria, wings that whir with the rustle of period dresses, with the bustle of sexed-up tremulation, our checkered past, our checkered whites, outlets for our earthing, plugging in our bed sheets, letters of overweening affection tossed as confetti-stenciled grains of rice released from onion glove. Other images flat by. Crows head from staging area to concealed roost, traverse a red sky. Here we'd like to recognize usurer hangs cousin,er, what my cousin says. Big crook put little crook in solitary. Go against the grain, they run you down. Go near an enclosure, they gun you down. Amherst in earnest, handing out plague to the wrong Indians, exemplar of Naritas nullius, that unoccupied gray matter, that conspicuous imprint, windrow to soul erosion. Here we'd like to call it in. Careless talk of scalping law stuck in our craw, consensual tactility at anti-oppression boot camp, that eldest organism, the first to orgasm, persuasion and excrete, contagion out of the same multitasker, the ooze of every oleaginous phrase, proven to choke and croak ozone. Cochlear hair is tickled to the limit of sonic stimulation. That's this stupid pelvic response. Here a pelican lands upon the loch, sifts through slime for metaphors with gular pouch, slurping translation of planetary extirpation into gold mine. This sunken figurehead, suspect chromaticism, gloam upon zygoma of colloidal beauty mask. This lust upon plasticrust, this warm dispatch from slashes and distressed pants, scraps of the unrequited, freighted back, unsalvageable selvage from the scheme of thought, subject to grubby chop shop. Here we'd like to recognize the freaking long poem we built over a heap of bones, the same old story of a bring your own pillory approach, the mouth on us full of uncouth anacoluthon from an ancient tongue for does not follow. The weather with its pathetic fallacy, uneasy as a stomach full of fritillaries feeding on loose strife beneath a crowd of mammatus clouds. The same old handbill nailed to telephone pole. Calling all scofflaws. You could not miss Ganalocthon in a shady corner of the territory with enough swag and that flim-flam swagger to get your goat up. Nothing could be more contrary to the truth. No other feller has more oil for your toil, more illusions for your confusion, more balm for your quivering limbs, more blessed calm for your jim jams. Fed up with foreign parts breaking down in your poems, flat out tired of seeing that sty in your mind's eye, then jog on down to the nearest re-education station for a free metacog worth 350 social credits. If you are not 100% satisfied in 15 days, notify one of our agents. Confidentiality will be monitored for quality assurance. Oh, this is going quickly, so there's a little bit of time. I can read this extra one. Yay, everyone. This was a chrysalis I saw that was blackened. I think it's maybe there was a parasite or something in it. I don't know. So it became a metaphor. And looking at some real estate, some kind of new built house, but it was kind of made like a little bit of a fortress, with, very little light coming in, and so fortified castles. So puncture. A hole in blackened chrysalis meets the field of our view about the proportions of a legal loophole, yea big, property through which drained wetland was dragged. We agree to keep out, creeping by space-age flanks of monster home compound under construction. We peep through that hole, cite the predictive factors for social parasitism plain and simple. Scofflaw says caterpillars of certain blues mingle among red ant larvae, mimic the queen if necessary. Not for the first time, he loses the plot, leaves 1,200 laborers, leaves counting the number of white moths a chipping sparrow can knock back, hundreds, falling short of hyperbole attributable to the latest muse in white cycling pants, in wide cycling pants, trammeling character arc under that tread worse for wear and need of repair before she can be tossed up into minor constellation. Never mind with allies like these. Jesus, another exegesis. You always got to pour milk on the dictionary for breakfast, Scofflaw? Picture the sole survivor of our spectacular catastrophe being a tardigrade. No more simian faces scratched upon cave surface. No more mammalian lily-dipping currents of a boggle-tastic universe. Another pat on the back for our capacity for self-annihilation. Back in the day, nothing was safe as houses. This nuclear family with digital Xanadu hunkering down in bunker, basking in splendid blue light. If that ain't progress, then I sure don't know what is. True story. Eyes upon aft wing, a little wood nymph flits by, the comma perched upon poplar body with red, orange, yellow coquetry. Grail is the question mark stuck to slender basswood or hanging from heart-shaped leaves, if not drunk on hops or proboscis deep in dung heap. More than once, we wonder why you linger here, Scofflaw, why you set us dreaming of purple butterflies just out of reach. The stern wind whistles through his frame, his voice barely audible. He recapitulates faint emanations of former aspirations. The latest to see the diversity gardens before he goes underground. Today, the webinars on how certain kinds of punctuation can puncture your hopes. Notice there's no etc. butterfly. As for the colorful question marks, we take them for notches on a perfectly viable career path. Yeah, so there's the, for people who don't know, there's a comma butterfly and a question mark butterfly. So, but no etc. butterfly. So there, that's kind of making sense. Okay, so I'm going to do one more, one that's slightly longer, and that will wrap up the session for my part of it, for reading. So the last part is there's a quote in here from the old movie with Marlon Brando movie called One-Eyed Jacks, and he's in it and he directed, I think. And he talks about seeing the other side of the jack's eye. It's something my mother likes this expression quite a bit about. I've seen your other eye. And so as this book is about, there's a lot about globalized pressures and different things about the way we're living. So this part is a little more about, I mean, I think it says character assassination, but I guess you call it cancellation today. And so who's not familiar with that in some form? And so Scofflaw is being pursued in a way by a sort of ardent admirer who's known, his name is, he's called Business English. So, and so anyway, he, so he's kind of an ardent admirer who's also a dangerous rival to Scofflaw because he wants to either appropriate or completely cull language. And so Scofflaw has a metaphysical, what's called a lexicon standoff with this character where he releases his word hoard. It's like a metaphysical draw, or where instead of guns, they have a kind of standoff of almost like anti-language versus language. And so anyway, I'll read that to the end of the book. You can listen for the quote from One-Eyed Jacks. The other side I seen. One day we get wind of the factoid, the air's changed. Say fake news one more time, I can't even. We feel it in Scofflaw's gangly stride. Comment on his being more laconic than the first Laconian. Only before you say Lacanian, put it out of your noggin, because our cuz was quick on the draw in a random way, especially when on a randonnée or swelling in the belly of the nearest coach house, poaching the finest axes to grind in these parts, pried loose from the leaky roof of the Natter Spear. There's no way our man's running back to Scratchback, that's for darn sure, or so the talk goes. Same day we get wind about air, we hear Scofflaws decant like a thief in the dark, with business English in tow. Business Inklish in tow. Funny business, we call him. Now, for the record, we never did trust Inklish, a shifty, fidgety type who boosted lame thoroughbreds before making the move to pinching lame papers on finer subtleties of the language. No ideas but his own. We'd seen him stagger around town with Stagger Lee, this administrator of authenticity, unless we're putting fart before horse. Fixin' to go, Scofflaw squeezes our cheeks, kisses our temples, and blubbers over our rubbernecking before he flags down the bus with a tongue flogging to keep a joggerly pace so he can spew his latest views on der unterbrochen Gedanke. And we're like, Scofflaw, this ain't no time for pesky Penderecki. Brilliant Polish composer. His testy riposte. It's always time for pesky Penderecki. That quartet for clarinet and strings never yet failed to put me in an ambiguous mood. We run alongside until the stitches in our sides get the better of us. Say the names, say the names. Scofflaw roars over the exhaust with a caveat. If you have a name, you can be sold. You can be told by that name. Leave or come. You become, in short, a reference. Or if bad luck is large in your future, you might become an institution. We'd prefer to defer to one of the Mouse Strauss bunch, them reputable studiers of the half-savage mind, for behind their citations twitches this twisted homunculus hanger-on. For origin story, try a chilling threnody in the rare unexpurgated edition out back of Has-Been, Saskatchewan, where the mustard's been having it off with the canola for as long as the eye can roll. Business English owns this notion straight out of the gate like a boss, mindful of mobbing should the air whiff that way bordering on social perturbation. Thing is, Scofflaw with his divining water, trademark, and thinky inklings ought to have gotten one of his hunches. There was nothing kosher about this little imp from the time he was no bigger than an avant-garde squiggle, wiggling among the weeds, snuggling up to misadventures and sundry Scofflaw purportedly had. Business English, with a voice that drips syrupy turpitude, pleads as attributes. Speaking cacographically, I've been to Scrawl College, test my mettle, go on, invigilate the proceedings, Scofflaw. You'll find me an open book that goes by Benedict S. English. To quench your curiosity, the big S stands for succotash. Scofflaw, I don't expect you've taken one gander at my blog, but I can give you the skinny. Just look how we've been in lockstep since the hour of our respected birthings, under the same lorn star, each emerging with an imprint, with the same outfit, in the same year, then being up for the same laurels. Though your star has a mite more polish to its spectral wavelength than the shine of mine, or so I reckon. Their shadows growing longer. When are they going to kick aside that tin of overheated beans and double up in the same mountain hardware hotbed to conserve sang-froid? Keep in mind, whenever two Valpokes hit the happy trails, their business is their business, but in such a tinderbox climate, we are obliged to provide a disclaimer for every ferro rod. Business English is a day shy of ageless, and in a year or two, hopes are high he'll blossom into an adult in touch with his own high-mindedness, a crack parser at 10 paces with adroitness with any heap of metadata, able to divide academician from macadamia milk within minutes, though it may be sour crepes. We never had no higher learning. The squeeze wear off. The squeeze wearing off. Funny business gets down to brass tacks. Tomorrow in the tussle, think on me, Scofflaw, you who sent me a sans serif form letter declaring love is form, you who clamped in mind forged fetters, you who drowsed when browsing my gallery of frowny faces. This apocryphal yarn shows him full of beans to cull wheelbarrows of this apocryphal yarn shows him full of beans to cull wheelbarrows of utterances from the lexicon upon pain of dearth, taking aim at the gun runner's decal for ethical discourse in a comfy chair. Commentators within earshot designate the next second as the sketchiest blur in the history of literature, aside from this rapid-fire aside. You're a one-eyed Jack in these parts, but I've seen the other side of your face. Some swear he cultivates his private stash in an ankle holster to bolster his word hoard, if not a lavish pen below the gaze of his navel, the sort that knew the shape of how nations slip and slide, or how news blows into town third hand, or even in tenfold gusts of that jocose-serious lexicon standoff. Business English blasts so fast before the conceptual blanks get there, he's already washing his hands of another fait de complicité with a generous spume of certainty foam. Then a half dozen squeezes of sanitizer on the other side of the bougie boutique double doors. Hours or years later, the aftermath of this proprioceptive sidestep is this cannon backfiring in the stump face of BS English with brain twithers, stubble jumpers, and a bright burst of verbiage outside his specialty. Call it appropriation in reverse, whittled down into verse. Faster than your average disaster, business English is losing syllabi, then loosening up in the molecular sense. A few pieces of silver survive the process just to give the myth a certain something. Never let them see your frets and never show your hand. Scofflaw yawns. No matter how sanitized you count on being, what you can't see can hurt you. For the unstudied, frazzled by nifty sleight of hand, lateralized brainin mainly rebounds any fricassee come your way, swaps every plain word for grade A utterance, dashing nomenclatures with minimal clatter to the ground, appears to lay folk like a whopping manifesto made manifest, and echoes like fast-acting tactical karma in a jam jar, no known side effects aside from complete defeat. Soft now. See the gaggle of pendraggers waddle this way and that, leaving the spines of various succulents upon compost heap in memory of funny business, the most anarchic customer to ever hitch up tenured breeches. The only way to keep it real, rustle up a colonial cochineal, must the lips of a lady with said product, to keep the legend of Scofflaw alive on many a used serviette before he trips off the grid, leaving us high and dry in another hiatus. In other words, there's something in our eye whenever the wind's still, too still, without the susurrus of his epic gassing, storming the fortified burrow of our hard-won affection. Follow the wanted circulars of countercultural workers to fingernail his whereabouts through conundrums and doldrums alike. Best bet he's linked up with semi-known scofflaws at the border of untariffed speech, if not at the fringe of formalized speakeasy, scuttling through underground say-load with cartloads of rejections, the only growth industry in them there parts. Though even I's gone strangely quiet. Talk all you want to time mechanic or social prescriber or a flutter of social butterflies about the man with the plans, and you won't get nada, save his squirreling away rain checks towards an operatic taco franchise. This, like most everything, is mere hearsay. Okay, thank you very much. And I will stop my reading there.
Thank you so much, Garry. I have to say, first of all, what a pleasure it is to just immerse oneself in poetry like that and to hear it read. I don't think many of us take the time to really just savor it like that. And there's so much in your reading. As I was sitting here, I was like smiling and laughing at the puns and the wordplay, and so many clever, like every sentence has so many wonderful, clever little turns of phrase in it. One thing, looking at the back of the book, there's a reference to the collection being inspired by Gunslinger, and there's definitely that sense of the Western throughout. What inspired you, or I guess which came first, the watching of Gunslinger or the collection? What inspired you to create it in that way?
Well, Edward Doran, as he was sort of was American poet. He went to England for a long time too, but he wrote this like a 4-book poetic work called The Gunslinger.
Mm.
And from his perspective, it was more of a Western motif, but he like of the Wild West and stuff. But he was making kind of poking fun at the academic world of which he was a part, and so he had these kind of outlandish theoretical characters, and so I was in Winnipeg and I found the book for like I don't know $8 in a shop, and I'd been aware of him because of Sharon Thiessen, so I should thank her for, as I always do. Sharon Thiessen had told me about him, or she told me about a review of his collected works. And so I got a really interested in the Gunslinger work, and so yeah, it's kind of a Canadian Indigenous or Indigenous Canadian, however we prefer, version of this, and also I'll say that Louise Bernice Half, our poet laureate, she has a book called Blue Marrow, a long poem, and that was another form of inspiration for me. But I was coming to it because she had so much of the language, like Cree language, and I felt like I was coming to the poem with nothing. And so I'm kind of trying to create my own myth in a space that's not where I'm a bit of an interloper. And so that's my big, because it's so unusual that I think there's a wide open space to create that kind of thing of your, like a kind of mythomania that keeps building. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. And just to remind other people that are listening, if you have questions for Garry, you're welcome to type them into the chat or the Q&A at this point. I feel like especially now there is, I mean, I think in general, Canadians have this sense of self-consciousness about being interlopers or trespassing into spaces. So I think, you know, as you say, you come in from an interesting perspective of having an Indigenous identity, but also feeling like you're not part of the space that you're in. And so I think it's a very maybe natural Canadian kind of conundrum to be addressing in your work. Would you find, or do you find that this collection is an extension of the pieces that you've written before?
Yes. Well, I had this other book, and this was when I lived in Saskatchewan and Regina for about a year, and that was really more desolate than Winnipeg, and so I was living on the edge in this weird condo I finally got into, and so the place was called Harbor Landing, and so I got this. I found it really strange because it's hard to imagine I'm from the seafaring people and seafaring people, and so I was thinking of how is there a harbor in the middle of this where it's flat, and so I read this book called Prairie Harbor, and that's like it's kind of a mock epic, like I call it my Dunciad, like it's the kind of, and so but it's quite sprawling in it and contains some Manitoba like a history in the middle, and then it contained like it's a big two kind of epic that split down the middle. And that was so in a way this book is oddly, it's kind of like the crib notes for that book. It's a strange thing, but I felt like I almost, in some cases there are restatements of some things in the other book, because you know, if you didn't notice the other book, then you can kind of revisit it in this form, which is a little bit more user friendly. It's shorter. It's not quite a big epic. It's my shortest book, maybe, because I tend to write these sprawling things, and so so it's a way to try to maybe reach out for readers a little more.
Mm-hmm. And I guess, like, how have you found it in this? I found it interesting in the book where you talk about reconciliation, and here we are in this Zoom land right now. What's the experience been like, you know, touring with this collection sort of through online means? Are you reaching different audiences than you think you would usually?
I think so. Yeah, I'm still getting used to it. So I was submitting videos to all the festivals. So this is my first live appearance where and so I'm kind of getting over a kind of it's part anxiety and phobia, but also a weird feeling of, because I really like doing live events where you can get that direct feeling of the crowd and talk to people. And so I'm doing a few events now. And so I think it is interesting to be able to reach out to people, but it doesn't quite, unfortunately, it doesn't quite have the feeling of you have from a live event. So maybe one of these days I'll be able to appear in Kingston.
Yeah, absolutely.
That would be nice.
I know that's what we've been saying. I mean, it is a difficulty because there is that disconnect, you know, and that the energy of the crowd is a tangible thing, and especially, I mean, poetry is such a performative thing to present. I think the flip side that we found that can be lovely sometimes is that it creates a sense of intimacy for the viewers, and that, like, you know, they are getting to see you sort of in your space, and there's not that, or there can be that sense of connection.
So it's almost like the opposite of stage fright, where you do
Right.
something like I have to imagine all these naked people, or
Right.
because I'm here by myself. And
Yeah.
sorry, that was like a me Tubin joke, but
Yeah.
I just mean that it's like I have to
Right.
imagine all these people that are listening,
Yeah.
so that I can kind of get psyched up to do it. But so I'm working on that, but it is hard for me, harder than when I like to have a crowd, and it kind of enlivens me quite a bit, animates me quite a bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like, this is like time for my my morning meeting or my afternoon meeting. So,
yeah, roll out of the bed and get your coffee and rub the sleep from your eyes. Yeah.
Yeah.
I kind of wanted to ask too. I feel like we actually had an event yesterday on how to read a poem, because it is such, for a lot of people, poetry seems like this dense and impenetrable art form, or there's a sense of intimidation that, you know, there is a certain level of knowledge that you must have before you can crack open a book. And I mean, your poems are not light, airy poems. Like, there's so much going on. But I guess, like, for people that are listening or people that are reading and approaching the book, like, what advice would you get to sort of lower their anxiety or trepidation about appreciating a piece of work?
Well, I think rather than talk about my work specifically, I'd say that it's like with everything, like you like, I don't know if you're like, people do a lot of exercising and therapeutics. So like anything you work at, things will become clearer to you. So it helps to read a little bit of stuff that you might not read normally. Like, I think that's more the, like, when, or it could be anything, like I like movies. Like you get used to things the more you spend time in them. And one thing people have told me is that with my work generally, whether it be my novels or my poetry, is that the more they read of it, the more it begins, they realize it has a certain kind of style to it. And it's almost like that it begets itself, like it feeds on itself, or it generates itself, I don't know, perpetuates itself, I guess is the term. And so people find that they read more of me, they kind of begin to get it. And that's what the people have told me. And so so you kind of become an addict, I guess. I don't know. But you go, okay, this is now, I think of it as like a big, rich feast. Like, and so though you might not want that all the time, it might be nice to have one once in a while where you go and get to have something really decadent. And I am a decadent. And so like just all the language for me. And so I know you might go, oh, I'm going to have indigestion after this, but you should, it's good sometimes to have a bit, because I think it's different than a lot of stuff that's available. Because I know there's a movement now, like people argue for everything has to be completely understandable and what I would say dumbed down. And I don't really agree with that. I don't like, the indigenous cultures specifically were very, at their height, were very complex and had a lot of like epics and things going on. And even from my cultural background, their stories are extremely convoluted and complicated with all these things happening narrative wise. And so I don't know how we got into this thing where we're writing books like, I don't know, the 18th or 19th century. Like, these conventions we had from there are in our novels and Canlit and stuff. And we're like, this is what a novel is, and here's how you read it. And so I find that really strange, because like we're ignoring a lot of innovations that have happened. And so I'm always trying to apply them to all of my work. And I feel it makes me a bit of a pariah, to be honest, I think, in the community. But because people go, what's this? I don't get this.
Right.
And so it's like, well, I don't know what you know, you could try to read a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, I think that way about experimental fiction as well, where I'm personally a big fan of it. And I know some people that the idea of it, they just right away, because it isn't, we like the familiar, you know, like there's a familiarity where it's like you can settle into a work or a piece of art and you know sort of the form and you're comfortable with it. And it can be hard sometimes when you don't get it off the first page. But yeah, I agree with you. There's something really rewarding about it suddenly making sense. And I've had pieces like that before where you don't necessarily sink into it right away, but all of a sudden it opens up and there's such an excitement with it. And I thank you again for reading, because I think really when you hear it and the speed and in which you read it, it just sort of flows over you and you really get into it that way. And so it becomes really delightful to just take it in that way. And I really hope that the people that are listening are going to want to go out and read it and take time with it. And I think that's the thing too, like poetry is more like a painting in a way where, you know, you can revisit it and see something different each time and new details emerge. And you don't look at a painting and say, oh, I've seen it, and walk away, right?
You're
Whereas,
taking a picture of it.
yeah.
That's done.
Yeah, yeah,
Here's me with it.
yeah.
But people, please take a picture of yourself with my book and post it.
Right.
I don't
Yeah.
mind that.
Yeah, absolutely. Share it on social
Or
media.
fragments of it, do that.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's another thing too with poetry is like the form on the page is so intentional as well. Like looking at the way that yours is done, like the, you know, the announcement that you read, calling all scofflaws, and then they're just the indentation and everything like that becomes such an integral part of the piece. I wonder if you have any recommendations for our listeners, if they really enjoyed your piece, your work today, if there are other artists out there that you'd like to plug and who you think are under celebrated or underappreciated.
I guess one of the people I know that I like quite a bit. I know him quite well, but he his work really amazes me. Is Michael Bond, Boughn. He has some really amazing poems. What it is there's a circle of people that I know, some are in Toronto, some in Vancouver, but they're kind of, maybe they're I don't want to call them adherents, but they're kind of from this circle that was familiar with Robin Blazer and a certain school of thought, and they would be aware of Ed Doran. Like, there's a little group in Toronto they held like a nice salon for me, and they were very aware of what I was doing with Edward Doran.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some young people that are quite brilliant poets around there, maybe. And Sharon Thiessen, of course, who I've learned a lot from, and she's a friend of mine as well. And it's just people I sort of think in the know, and they're kind of a little bit in tradition, but they're doing new stuff as well. And I think that's really important. Like one of the editors that looked at this original manuscript, I mean, he gave me good advice, but he was just very against the long poem at all. And like, this is not a thing in Canada anymore. And so, so I kind of did listen to him and wrote a shorter version of my book. But
Right.
my editor was really happy there's a long form in the archive now, because it's maybe more like Ed Doran. So there's like two different versions of this book. And yeah, so people that are willing to engage with it. So I'd say Michael Bond and Sharon Thiessen are two that are really cerebral and interesting, and they're not afraid of difficult work.
Mm-hmm. I have a question here from Danny.
Okay.
And she says, hi, thank you so much for sharing your written works and experiences with us today. Your use of imagery and metaphors is quite creative and really gave rise to the issues you discuss. I was wondering if writer's block ever comes into play during your writing process, and how you personally deal or overcome when that may arise.
Yeah, writer's block. I think I experience it more when I'm working on novel projects, and that I find because I find I've written a few novels, and it's more of a work person type thing where you it's there every day and you sit down and see whether you're inspired or not. Where I associate the poem more with inspiration. So I remember George Bowen always talks about how Wordsworth wasn't obviously inspired to write the prelude like in one night, like all these parts, but it's a little like that you can be inspired to write segments of something. And so I find that with a work like this, I would be inspired to write the segments, and it's usually in a quick burst for me. So I'm explaining process more than how to deal with writer's block. But for me, it's more about just working at something over a long period of time, and that's the trick. And so usually it's best to establish some kind of routines that you have. So you have to write anyway, or like William Carlos Williams said, there's always about like at least 5 minutes in the day where you can go and set for yourself. So you'd be surprised how much you can do if you just set aside 5 minutes and write anything, how it adds up. And so I think that's more an idea of how to deal with if you're struggling, or you feel, oh, I'll just, because we waste a lot of time in our lives and we could be using that time. I know we say, oh, I can't because my life is like, but it's like we actually, like all that time that was spent on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or one of those things. There is time. It's just, you just have to set aside even the smallest amount of time and see how much you can accomplish, even if you just write anything. Just, it doesn't matter. Just do a blank.
Mhm. Well, and I think that's good advice too, in terms of
Like in Finding Foresters, like listen to the sound of the keys. And Finding Forrester actually has some good writing advice in it, because like just start with somebody else's writing and start typing it out, and you'll see how soon you deviate from what's there, and you'll realize, oh, I'm actually writing something now, and I didn't realize I'm actually. And that's a good way to. I often begin with what I call template works. Like in this case, Doran would be, the Gunslinger would be almost like a template, like as if I'm having a conversation with Ed Doran about his work and a bit of a critique, and I'm cycling through that, and but it's all different words. It's not his words, it's my words. How did that happen? I don't know, but it's a good day. If you feel intimidated or you're not, like, start with something else and see, it might lead you to a new thing.
Well, I think it's more of a tradition too in poetry, where there's that inspired by, or homage to, ode to different artists, and yeah, it's often very different and delightful what comes from those reference points. So, and I think too, what you were saying about, like, I think we have the sense that there has to be this incredible formality and structure to, like, I am sitting down at this time, for this period with this pen, where, yeah, art, like, the more structured you make it, the more intimidating it's going to feel, because something's going to be off that's going to prevent you from doing what you want. So.
Mm-hmm.
We have a couple more minutes if anyone else has a question. 2 minutes. Well, if nobody else does, I want to thank you so much, Garry, for sharing your work with us today, and for the reading. It's a pleasure to be able to have you here in the capacity that we did, and I do hope that we have the opportunity to welcome you to an in-person festival sometime soon. As I mentioned at the beginning, we have a draw for a copy of Scofflaw, and that the winner of that is Debbie Tester. So congratulations, Debbie. If you want to email info@, and we will get a copy of that out to you. And if you didn't win a copy and you would like one, which of course you're going to want to now, I would encourage you to visit our local independent bookseller, Novel Idea Books, here in Kingston, or the independent bookstore wherever you live. To pick up a copy of Scofflaw and Garry's other work. As he mentioned, he has novels and poetry. And I want to just finally thank you so much for supporting Kingston Writers Fest and joining us here today. There's still all today, tomorrow, and Sunday of events, so please check out the lineup at kingstonwritersfest.ca. And thank you again, Garry.